In this video, we'll review the basics for piecing together your quilt block. For my sample block, I'm using 9 4.5-inch squares, which will yield a 12-inch finished block. First, I'm going to start by laying out my pieces so I know what order I'm going to sew them in. Next, I'm going to sew together the first 2 blocks of each row using 1/4-inch seam allowance. A 1/4-inch seam allowance is what is most commonly used when quilting, and it's important that this is accurate so that your pieces line up and the overall size of your quilt is what you want it to be. We're going to do what is called chain piecing, so I'm going to continue straight into the next piece without stopping or cutting my threads. You'll find that this is the most efficient way to piece together your quilt. I'm also not backstitching on each piece because these seams will all be enclosed in other seams, and the backstitching can cause unwanted bulk. Once the first 2 blocks are all sewn together, I'm going to add the 3rd block, making sure I keep them in the order that I want them in. Once my rows are sewn, I want to press my seams so that my rows are lying flat. To press my seams, I'm going to apply a little heat to each seam as it was sewn, and then open it up with my fingers. Typically, you want your seam allowances pressed towards the darker of your 2 fabrics, but there are always exceptions. Then I'll apply the iron to my open seam and press. I also want my seam allowance going in the opposite direction of the row they will be attached to, so that the seams will nest together and the bulk of the seam allowances is evenly distributed. So my top and bottom rows will have the seams pressed in towards the darker block, and my middle row has the seam allowances pressed outward. Once my seams are pressed, it's time to stitch my rows together. I'm going to pin at the seams where I want the pieces to line up. As you get more comfortable with piecing, you may not always need to place pins. And then I'm going to stitch this seam with a 1/4-inch seam allowance, and then repeat for the final row. Now that everything is stitched together, I'm going to press the final seams on my block to get everything to lie flat. For these seams, I'm going to press the seam allowances in towards my darker center fabric. And that's how you piece together quilt blocks.